Yes, it's visible.
Okay, thank you.
It's clear.
So, as I was just telling, I did my PhD in uh, population genetics and genomics, and currently I'm working as a postdoctoral researcher in SENCKENBERG Biodiversity and Climate Research Center at Frankfurt. Today, I would be briefly talking about how the biodiversity and ecosystem restoration can help us in climate change mitigation and adaptation. So just to briefly introduce the two terms, that's like the biodiversity and the climate, ecosystem. So perhaps now in the time of this climate activism, everyone knows that what biodiversity is, but just to introduce it has three main levels of variety of life that we see, the variety of life on our earth. The first level basically is genetic level, at the genes level, or how we see that every individual that we see is morphologically different. But on a scientific point of view or a molecular biologist point of view, I try to look into genetic differences, like what are the differences in DNA code that makes one individual differ from the other individual of the same species or even a same population, and how we will see later that how these differences can be important to help us to mitigate climate change impact on our ecosystems. Second comes the species diversity. We see that every in our localities or in if we go at a broader level on ecosystem, there are multiple organisms living together and interacting with each other. So either they are the providing food, as we see as in case of plants, they are primary producers. They are producing all this carbon as a body mass that is used by all secondary and tertiary consumers later. Uh, and then comes, so we see that species diversity mean and a habitat, when it has more species, they are more interconnected, they can more efficiently use the resources of that environment, and that ecosystem has more, or that habitat has more resilience against any climate fluctuations or any climate changes. And then come ecosystem diversity. If a region or a country has a multiple diverse ecosystems, we can see if one ecosystem or one habitat fail in case of certain drastic changes in the climate, and other supportive habitat, if it is there or ecosystem is there, it can somehow counterbalance the impact of climate, or it can be that those impacts can be the ecological impacts or directly the impact on the food production and etc. So just to sum it up, like it has three levels: genetic diversity level, species diversity level, and ecosystem diversity level. And we see that when we see, okay, diversity, we have to count what are the numbers. So I would not go into the numbers of these organisms. We see in one of that pie graph on the right hand, these are the plant organisms and the different varieties of plants, which are flowering plants that we see, all angiosperm, gymnosperms, which we normally call non-flowering plants, and others organisms, basic level organisms, which can be ferns or mosses. And as we see also, there are a lot of numbers. We see that how the animal, in case of animal kingdom, how the different organisms are. So we see that there is a lot of diversity, but the problem is why we are worried about the diversity when there is already a lot of different variety of organisms are present here. So as I said, it is mostly about numbers. So we have to see what human did during this maybe a few hundred years, especially, or maybe in this whole Anthropocene, which is we called human, where we basically induced human different changes in our environment, which are caused by different actions, can be fossil fuel, burning of fossil fuels, or other changes in the landscapes that we did, how we impacted these numbers. As we see here, again, So this diagram or this graphical graph shows that the plant makes the huge, like highest number of this diversity or the planetary diversity, that is 4.50 billion tons of carbon is it makes the body mass of plants. And where then if we go to the other areas, like then comes the bacteria, which makes another bigger taxa or group of the living organism, then fungi, and then comes, and where we are somewhere around there in the right corner. I will go to the next slide to show. So we are here, humans are just this bit of the whole diversity picture. So if I go back, so overall diversity, we see the plants, bacteria, fungi, and other archaea like non-bacterial microbes, and then comes protists, and then there are some of those arthropods and other insects, and then comes humans. So we are very tiny number as compared to the whole biodiversity mass of the planet, but what we are doing, our impact on the whole, these biodiversity numbers are huge. During these last, especially last few centuries, or more importantly, we has changed these numbers very drastically. And especially if we take this a number here, that since 1970s, there's basically a kind of the peak of industrial revolution. We already had wiped about 68% of mammals, birds, and fish from fish population. So we're not, I'm not talking about the like, we do not have this species anymore, but we have the species, but we destroyed their population. So if there will be less number of individuals, less number of population, overall diversity of that species would be affected. And we will see that how this decrease in overall diversity of a species or a population going to impact or is affecting already our ecosystem. Then comes that 60% of all animals on the earth are livestock. So again, so if we say, okay, we have a lot of animals, but what is a lot of mammals, but what percentage of these mammals is the livestock? So we have 60% of those mammals are just livestock. So like these are domesticated animals that we are rearing them. We are again because we need a lot of meat, because with this all that capitalist economy, every person has a lot of money, everyone want to eat meat, and we, in order to supply this meat production, we have to this commercial farming, and we have a lot of livestock, which can be cattle and pigs. And then we see there are also huge proportion of human population of this whole mammalian population that we currently have, and there is only 4% of wild animals. So in case of wild animals, this is the true diversity of mammals. All that is rest is basically human induced or modified picture of the diversity that we're getting. It's not the true representation. So what actually we have the true or natural diversity is only 4% in case of mammals. And as we also see that we have drastically reduced the biodiversity and the number of different species, but it can be either by intensification of agricultural practices or some other. So we see that crop diversity in formal farmers' field is also drastically reducing. Out of all that numbers I showed you in the first slide, that we have a lot of variety of plants, but how much of those plants we are using as a food? Only 6,000. And then again, out of those 6,000, only 9 of those plant species makes our 60% or more than 60% of our food, or the staple food that we are regularly using. So we are not using all, the first thing, we are not using all the diversity. We are kind of introducing monoculture in our planetary ecosystem that cannot sustain any climatic changes or any environmental changes or any pest or pathogen infestations. Similarly, we have, like, as I said, that we are also reducing or impacting the other species. Most importantly, you might have heard about the decline in insect populations, because when comes into the primary productions, these pollinators or insect populations are very important, because you know that in case of plants, in order to produce fruit or seed, they need certain organisms which can transfer pollen from one flower to another flower so that they can be cross pollination. So they are able to produce for fruits. But with all this uncontrolled insecticide sprays or the pesticides that we are using while we are in this industrialized farming era, we are basically killing our insects, or we're not able to see so many even butterflies around. Even in my lifetime, about like 30 years ago when I was a child, I was able to see so many, much more or higher number of butterflies in our gardeners or even our nearby fields, but we do not able to see them anymore. So I would not go again into so much of these numbers. There are some of those graphics to just show that how much dramatically we have reduced the number of diversity of the different species, and how much number of organisms we are currently using in our daily life as a food, as a source of other benefits that we're getting from there. So as I said, that biodiversity is basically provides what biodiversity provides us a healthy ecosystem, because ecosystem can only stay healthy if they are diverse, because diversity is, as you just take the example of social diversity, cultural diversity, religious diversity of a society. If the society is diverse, they can have different individuals who can go different, who can adopt different occupations. They have different skill and knowledge levels, and they can contribute at different level to the overall growth of the GDP of the country or the welfare of the society. The same is true for the living organisms. If there are the wide variety of organisms living together in the ecosystem, they can interact with each other, they can efficiently use and economically use the resources of that given place, and in turn what they contribute to the overall health of the ecosystem. And overall health of the ecosystem is better, we ecosystem will be more resilient. They can cope with all those environmental changes that we are currently facing, or we might be, or of course not might be, we surely going to face this next few decades or more also. They're getting severe and severe. So if our ecosystems have more resilience, then comes whole society. And here you see this a tree, and there all these 15 or 17 SDGs, social developmental goals, all the social developmental goals, then we see that they are depending on the healthy ecosystem. If we cannot really maintain the health of our ecosystem, we're not able to spare money to do or contribute to all these targets that we set for these social developmental goals. Then comes the term ecosystem. So as I said, basically in a very simple word, any organism, house or home of any organism is called basically ecosystem. There are different interactions, like in the family or in a house, there is a different hierarchical levels where where humans or families interacting with each other, supporting each other. Similarly, in a habitat, different organisms are interacting and supporting each other, and how this ecosystem functions. So there are the biotic and abiotic components. And the same, if we categorize these ecosystems into different levels, we have atmospheric ecosystem, freshwater ecosystem, terrestrial, marine, and subterranean ecosystem. Like the underground, we have a lot of forms of the life that are contributing to the overall fertility of the soil. But look what we are doing. So this is, if we divide the whole surface of Earth, how we are using this, our Earth surface. So we see that human using about the two-thirds of the global ice-free Earth's land surface, but for extensive pasturing. They are using it intensive agriculture practices. They are using them for infrastructure development, which can be roads, cities, which can be or urban or associated infrastructures, which are any road links, motorways and stuff like that. So the major part of that whole available habitable part of our earth, we are using for only one species, that the humans. And we are not really considering what part we are leaving for the other life, basically, which is basically the sustainable source, or what we call a sustainable fountain of our ecosystem. And if they would not able to survive, we're not going to survive. We're not going to survive on Mars. We have to survive here with all these different species. And that's why it is very important to take care of our whole biodiversity numbers and ecosystem organisms which are present in our environment. This is another example how we are changing, shifting the global land use. So we see that it is coming from BC to 2015, and we are continuously population. So this line is showing the increasing trend of human population, which is touching around 8 billion or 7 billion now at this moment. And as human population is increasing, we're reducing the natural and semi-natural ecosystems, and we are replacing them with grazing because we need more meat, and we are introducing more croplands because we need a more staple crops like wheat, barley, and other stuff like that, grains. And that all intensified agriculture, pasteurize grazing practices, basically degrading our soils. And the soil is another such important source there for the health of our ecosystem, that as you see that the carbon sequestering in the soil is 10 times higher than the carbon that we see as a form of forest in the whole world. So it means that, as you might know, this sequestering, basically capturing. So what the living organisms are doing, especially plants, they take the carbon out from the atmosphere and they store them as a body mass. So as much as they able to remove it, it will reduce the carbon dioxide amount in our atmosphere. In turn, it will reduce the heat in our temperature of environment, and then so on, the climate changes and all that. So what we are focusing is basically, we are trying to reduce carbon dioxide from environment. But we are focusing on one thing. So we see that our governments are even national organizations like UN, they are focusing on just forests, or somehow they have these things in their policies, but then the countries are not following them on a letter and spirit. So they're focusing on, okay, we have more plants, but we have to equally focus on other ecosystem, which, as I said, that is soil, which is an important contributor to the removal of carbon dioxide from the soil, from the atmosphere. And as we see that about 24% of our global lands we have already degraded, and we are losing about 3.4 tons of soil, fertile soil every year. And at the end, if we keep on losing our fertile soil, then we would have food problem and other biodiversity issues, because we will be losing dramatically, reducing the habitat of the wildlife as well. So we see this is very nice infographic that again coming from ICUN, where we see that we have basically destroyed every ecosystem, coming right from the top of the elevated mountains to the sea level. We have destroyed, we have huge impact, a human footprint on all these ecosystems. As you see in these numbers, that 25% of the world land area degraded during last 50 years. 3.2 billion people are affected by the land degradation. It can be in the mountains, plains, or agriculture or fertile lands or plains. And then again, the estimated loss of is about 6.3 trillion per year. And then are many causes. Again, I would not go. So the causes can, as I said, we talked the intensive grazing mechanism, intensive agriculture or industrialized farming, and then global consumption is increasing. We are switching more from plant-based food to the animal-based food. And for that, we need to have more clearing the forest, and they destroy all that wild habitat, and that's what we are doing. We are, at the time being, we're increasing the food production by bringing more land into agriculture or grazing sectors. But in the long term, what we are going to have a reduced food production, because it would dramatically damage the soil quality, ecosystem services, and biodiversity of those areas. Then, as I said, that biodiversity basically supports the ecosystem, and what ecosystem gives a variety of benefits that we generally call that ecosystem services. These ecosystem services, there is a variety of ecosystem services which can be provisioning services, that they provide food, raw material, medical resources, or fresh water. They can be regulating services, which one of the very important is the climate regulation, and the second most important is water cycle regulation, and so on. And it also supports the nutrient cycle, photosynthesis, and soil formation process. And then cultural, that starts from health to all that spiritual or religious benefits that we get from ecosystem services. Other than that, if we just take some examples, human health. About 25% of the modern pharmaceutical originate in the tropical plants. 75% of all cancer medication originates in the rainforest. And we see that if there are a lot of participants and also some speakers from South America, American region, and they can see visibly that how dramatically we are cutting down those equatorial rain, or these tropical or equatorial rainforests, and replacing them with our agricultural forms or stuff like that. Similarly, we see that most of the potent painkiller comes from the marine cone snails. And this I already mentioned. There's basically very important the role insects or the pollinator as a whole that are playing to the health or contributing towards the health of our ecosystem, where we see, just take the example of this, the global value of animal pollination. There has been recently a lot of awareness campaigns to support bee colonies and increase the culture, like the honeybee production or the colony maintenance and stuff like. So what if we, in terms of economy, if we see that global value of these pollinators is about from 200 to 500 billion, and the honeybee contributing 17 billion towards the global economy as a capital, and then the wild bees so on about 3.5 billion. So I would just give you one example of the pollinators here. We all like, and our children like, the chocolates, and we see that these chocolates are coming from the cocoa plant. Sorry for my so cacao plant, and that we see that the most of these cacao plants are basically grown in these tropical or equatorial regions, and this fruit of cacao depends on the pollination that is basically done by a mosquito. And we have tremendously reduced these populations of this mosquito. No other insect can pollinate the cacao plant to give us chocolates. So if we are keep on decreasing, and it has already been decreased, and we are now going towards artificial pollination methods that are more expensive. So you can see, if there is a natural organism present in our ecosystem, and somehow we removed this tiny mosquito from our ecosystem, how much economic and social and ecosystem losses we can or have to bear for that. So if you see that if there is these mosquitoes left, there will be no chocolates, or we have to create artificial bubbles like what we try to do, these artificial pollination methods. Similarly, another example that will just give you the importance of mangroves, and that we see these only 500 width of the mangrove, 500 meter breadth of this mangrove forest can reduce the impact of any storms that are coming in coming through our seas. It can reduce it up 50 to 100%. So these mangroves, which has been very I would say the cruelly overused ecosystems, for whatever reason, they're cut just for, even if we take the example of, they are, most of them are so used for burning fossil fuels, and also we are cutting down the river water that is going to the sea. And if there's less river water in that areas, the salinity level of those ecosystem increases, and that also affect the population of ecosystems. Again, then simple one example, I'll give the hurricane that was recently in 2017, Florida has to face, and about 1.5 billion US dollar was prevented because of these mangroves which are growing in the along those forest coasts, or sorry, sea coasts. So similarly, we see that about 60 billion US dollar each year is contributed by the mangrove forest, only by contributing the damage that might have caused by these sea originated all these storms, which can be hurricanes or others. So there can be different, I would not go into the details of so much, but where there are most of those drivers of ecosystem loss or biodiversity loss are the anthropogenic drivers, like the human induced drivers, which, as I said, that the intensification of agriculture, then intensification, grazing practices and stuff like that, that has overall changed or affected the biodiversity and also contributed towards the degradation of our ecosystem. Can anyone just tell me how long I spoke? Can I just cut it short, or is it within the time? Shama, can you please tell me?
It's perfect. I mean, you can go on. We still have some time.
Okay, thank you. So I'll just try to maybe finish it in next 2 to 5 minutes. So what we have to do is basically we have to look for the nature-based solutions, which all, as I said, that nature-based solutions all has to be coming, like we have to avoid all these artificial changes that are bringing into our ecosystems. We are changing the landscapes, our whole overall structure of our ecosystems, and also we are destroying the number of different organisms, destroying the populations of different organisms. And if we have to avoid doing this, we have to go for sustainable management, restore natural and modified ecosystem back to their original form. And we have to look at ecosystem level, landscape level, not like promoting one particular kind of biome like forest or something else. We have to focus equally on forest as well as wetlands or peatlands. We have to focus on mangroves. We have to focus on soil ecosystem. So we work as a whole, like the health of the whole planetary system can only be um, improved or restored if we work as a whole on the whole picture. And then in turn, if you see from this graphic that this whole thing can contribute to the climate change mitigation, adaptation. It can reduce the disasters that might have been caused by these dramatic climate changes. And overall, who is going to benefit? Humans are going to benefit. So we cannot be, expect to be benefit or survive at the cost of our ecosystem and the biodiversity. So we really have to look into this judicially, that what we are causing, what damage we are causing to our ecosystem. So then we have to also strengthen our research that is looking different patterns of genetic diversity. So as I said, so I would not go into much detail. So it's a few slides that I included. Maybe there are some more knowledgeable audience. So in this slide, you see there are these, each circle is basically showing a population that has been sampled across Eurasia. For this plant that you see in the right corner, which is called a microthraspe plant. So you do not have to worry, it's just a plant, it's a small herb. And we sampled about 700 different populations that is coming from all the way from Central Asia to Spain, and then all the way from Sweden to North America. And you see that all these circles have different colors. Darker or more red the circle color, it has more diverse population. As I said, the population, diversity of population mean all the individuals are different, slightly different from each other. And the populations, if they are more, if the individuals are different from each other, they would be able to, you know, stand against all these climate changes. And if the populations are not diverse, they would not able to sustain the climate changes. And you see all these red or orange circles are basically in the south of a particular line. That line is basically called glacial line. This was the line. Up till that line, all parts of the Europe and Asia were glaciated about 10,000 years. So it's like it started glaciation that we call ice age about 2 million years ago, and it continued about 10,000 years ago. So we see all these populations are basically in the south of that line. So it means these are the diversity rich areas. But again, these are the areas which are more threatened by climate changes. We see that Spain, Italy, Greece, Turkey, all these regions are basically witnessing higher temperature in summer and prolonged drought or dry seasons. And this all is affecting the region. So this is the example of one species. So it means other species are also more diverse in these regions. So just I wanted to point out that you can also see from this bar graph that Iberia, which is basically Spain, Apennine, basically Italy, Balkans, Anatolia, Armenia, Central Asia. So we see that there are different levels of diversity in different regions, but overall diversity is more in the south. So that has to be basically looked into each region. We have to locally, maybe country-wise, Pakistan, India, South Asian, or all that countries has to look, they have to strengthen their faculties and research sectors so they can, because we do not have estimates of standing biodiversity. We know there are 10 species, but we do not know how diverse the population of that species is. Is this all artificial population? Like as we see in case of dogs, we have so much domesticated, we have so much interfered with the population of dogs that about 90% of the dog populations are basically pet animals. So they do not have any wild genes. So did we do the same thing with other species? We have to look for that. So this is another example of another herb that we were using. So this is one country, which is basically Italy. You see that more colors and more colorful bars we see in the south and less colorful bars we see in the north. So we go in the mountains, we see all blue color. We see in the south, there are green, red, and so these colors again showing the diversity of populations. More diverse populations are in the south and less diverse populations in the north. So we have to have the idea where individuals and populations or species are more diverse, where biodiversity is higher. So we can focus our resources on those areas. We can conserve those areas because those areas can provide us important stuff that maybe we can have to introduce at some time into other areas. Then there are also certain modeling when we know, so maybe I'm going into too much technical details. As I said, if we know the diversity of a region, then we model it. We use certain statistical softwares or algorithms and we model it, that how this diversity is going to stand the climate change in future. And we see, as you see in these models, there are red to green color, basically it's showing the higher diversity, to we go to the blue is a low diversity. So we model it just to show you that there is another form. So we have to strengthen our research areas, local research teams and universities and faculties who can assess the standing biodiversity and then model it against the environmental changes in future. So this is the areas, priority areas that has, again, these are modeled priority areas that the researchers had modeled. They able to find that the areas which need immediate priority, which should be the immediate priority of restoration. Again, red to blue goes to the highest to lowest level of priority. And you see India Asia and all these sub-Saharan or African countries and the red zones. So these are the highest priority areas where most of our resources should be spent to conserve the biodiversity, because here the biodiversity is mostly threatened by or will be threatened in future. As I said, that a lot of biodiversity is being lost because we are intensifying agriculture. So we cannot stop it because we need more food, because we are more people now. But we can basically change current industrialized agricultural practices to sustainable agricultural practices. And it is quite possible, as you see over. So this is again some map which shows you green colors. All green colored regions basically during last 20 or 30 years, they able to double or triple the agriculture production without harming the overall forest cover of the region. They even able to increase the forest cover. They were able to increase the wild habitat. So as you see, there were about 12 countries which were able to increase the forest cover by 10%. This is a big number, and this can be done if we try to, collaborate with each other. We try to develop the capacity of the countries which do not have this technical knowledge and the research skills. So there should be more collaboration, interlinkages between the countries and societies. I think I would just tell one more slide. People talk a lot that, okay, we spend on this ecosystem, but if we can also defend those spendings which are sustainable financing and spending by numbers. If we spend about $3,000 in tropical forests, we are going to get $150,000 in return. So this can be 50 times more higher returns, the amount that we're spending on those ecosystems. So it goes, as you see in the lake ecosystem, we see the woodland ecosystem, or every time they are more than 10% higher the returns than the spending. So we see in mangroves, in case of the last one, as you see in the blue part, if we send about $3,000, we got $86,000 in return. So it can be the damage they are able to save us from, or they are able to increase the biodiversity of those regions. And this has been practically done in China in this about 2 decades ago. They started about 3 decades ago. This was a land which was in Shanxi province, which they started a project in 1984, and they were able to completely or partly restore that ecosystem in 28 years. So it needs about a decade or two to return over the things again back to healthy ecosystem, and that has increased many times the income of those local people who are living there. They has increased the health and ecosystem services of that region as well. I think I would just go to the last slide. So the take-home message, you saw this picture previously, which was all degraded and destroyed ecosystems. And if we work on, we will be able to restore all the ecosystem, which looks very nice and pretty now. And we're hoping that as we are in the decade of restoration for UN and ICUN, and hopefully all countries could get together and contribute to the restoration of ecosystem by conserving, preserving, assessing the biodiversity resources they have, then putting the resources to conserve those biodiversity resources. And this biodiversity would contribute to the health of the ecosystem, and it would help or support us in our restoration efforts. So basically, as we said, we should have a relationship of interdependence. We can only able to live if our ecosystem is there, and if our planetary ecosystem or nature is in a healthy state. And if we have destroyed it, we will be basically destroying ourselves, our future generations. And it's very important to have to work with a one health approach, where we look after the health of our ecosystem, all the living organisms living on our ecosystem, and human health and other species as well. So with these words, I would just finish my talk, and I hope I was not too cryptic and complicated. but I will hand over to Shama, please, for if there are some questions.
It was a wonderful lecture. In fact, our chat box got flooded with praises for you. You can see it. It's very nice and very involving lecture.
Much it's
Okay, so
flattering,
now,
but yeah, it's thank you so much for all the participants who liked the talk.
yeah, it's flooded with praises.